fifth biannual running of the Kenya Airways East African Safari Classic Rally returns once again to some of the East African Classic Rally stages. Familiar names like the Taita Hills, Mbulu Escarpment and the Kerio Valley with the famous God's Bridge, all stirring excitement in the veins of drivers and spectators alike. There would be new stages too, taking competitors around the base of Mount Kilimanjaro, and a chance to relax in one of Kenya's premier elephant sanctuaries, Amboseli National Park. The rally would once again start from the sun-kissed beaches of the Indian Ocean, in the historic port town of Mombasa. With past experience of the usually hot and dry classic safaris, teams could be forgiven for bringing predominantly dry weather tyres for their cars. But recent torrential rain across Kenya and northern Tanzania would play havoc with the route. This year, the drivers were in for a real safari adventure. 2011 would be a truly vintage year, with a bumper crop of international teams. Tuthill Porsche would be supporting 9 entries this year, including former world champion and 5-time safari winner Bjorn Waldergard, international superstar Travis Pastrana, better known for his exploits on 2 wheels, and Stephen Funk, founder of Race for Change, which would also be supporting defending champion Ian Duncan in the mighty Ford Capri Perana.
Yeah, we've been building it for like 2.5 years. It's 302 V8, which they made in South Africa. So yeah, it seems to be okay. It's still a bit heavy, but yeah, we'll see how it works.
I obviously knew about the race in the WRC, but heard about it a few years ago when they started the classic safari, and I thought this is going to be something it's such a big challenge and something that I looked forward to as a kid, and didn't think I would ever have an opportunity to come over here for such an adventure. But working with the Race for Change guys, it's just such an awesome deal.
Kronos Vintage would be returning with 4 Porsches, headed up by team owner Jean-Pierre Mondron. The team would be looking for a win this year with Gregoire de Mevius, former WRC frontrunner, raid rally specialist and winner of the recent Morocco Classic Rally.
I've done it a long time ago, 20-something years ago, and I'm happy to be back. I like the country, and we'll see what happens. We do our best.
Steve Perez returned with his Kick Energy team, which this year had expanded to include 3 Datsun 260Zs. For himself, Geoff Bell and Andrew Siddle.
The last car was very good in the mud. I'm sure this is going to be a bit more challenging, but fortunately I think we're one of the few guys who've got really good wet tyres. So.
Former WRC Navigator champion Phil Mills has switched his talents to preparing classic Mark II Ford Escorts under the banner of Viking Motorsports, and would be running 2 cars this year for former world champion Stig Blomqvist and John Llyod, who had both missed the event in 2009.
It's built by Phil Mills in Wales, a car we used in Morocco last October. Went beautifully, and I'm really pleased to be here.
New to the event this year would be the GPS tracking system, allowing event director Surinder Thatthi the ability to monitor in real time the exact positions of all the competitors and safety vehicles on every stage. Spectators from around the world could also follow the event live on the rally website using Google Earth. The rally would once again start from the tusks in the centre of Mombasa town, giving excited crowds the chance to get up close to see these magnificent machines. 21 Porsche 911s lined up at the start, making it by far the most popular car in the event. Defending champion Ian Duncan would lead the cruise away, flagged off by Evanson Mwaniki, chairman of title sponsor Kenya Airways. The rally proper would kick off from the White Sands Hotel the following morning. The cruise would leave the coast and start the first stage through elephant country on the ranches around Kisigo Mountain. The second stage took the cruise into the Taita Hills, the tight and twisty uphill section a real challenge for the drivers and machines alike. Stage 3 would be a long 115-kilometre stage from Imali across the Selengai Plains to Amboseli. Duncan was quickest on the first stage, opening up a 13-second gap over Waldergard. With very little testing before the event, the car was performing well before a navigational error in the tighter hills dropped him back to 5th. He set the fastest time on the day's third stage run to Amboseli, moving him back up to 3rd by the end of the day. Bjorn Waldergard was consistently second fastest on all 3 of the day's stages, which meant he would open up a lead of almost 2 minutes by the end of the day. The Porsche was running on song, and the old master had lost none of his flair. Gregoire de Mevius was surprised by the pace on the day's opener, but soon found his rhythm and went 3rd fastest on stage 2, catching Gerard Massy in the process. Despite hitting a rock in the mud on stage 3, de Mevius was holding on to 2nd overall. Travis Pastrana was quickest through the tighters, the tight and twisty stage suiting the nimble Porsche. To add to his challenge, he was driving with a broken ankle. He would drop time on the 3rd stage with a puncher, getting caught out by a hidden rock and dropping back to 7th overall.
What's it like sitting next to Travis? Is it
the best? To co-drive him, he is so cool, so fantastic, and always the right word in the right moment, and superb.
Thomas Flohr was gradually increasing his pace over the first 3 stages. He went 8th fastest through the tighters, catching the 2 cars in front in the process, and then went 6th fastest on the long 115-kilometre stage, avoiding the mud and ending the day in 6th place overall. Stig Blomqvist was 5th fastest through the tighters, the Escort seen here winding its way through the spectacular stage. Rain had left the surface slippery, adding to the already challenging climb and descent. Disaster would strike on stage 3 when the rear differential broke, plunging Stig down the leaderboard to 31st. Steve Perez was pushing hard, setting the 3rd fastest time on the opener. However, his charge would come to an end in tighter hills with a broken prop shaft. The crew would manage to change the prop shaft and get going again, but not before losing over an hour, forcing them to run behind slower cars. He would then get stuck on stage 3, dropping down the leaderboard to 33rd.
With prop shaft broke, fortunately Stefan changed it, so we've lost at least an hour in there. So that is the end of a really good rally. There it goes.
Teammate Geoff Bell was having a better run. The 260Z was much more powerful than the 180B that Bell had stunned many with in 2009, and he was enjoying the extra power. Despite stopping in the tighters to assist Perez and a big spin on stage 3, Bell was holding on to 5th overall by day end. JP Mondron rounded off the top 10 with a steady drive in his beautifully prepared Porsche. Despite the mud, the crew were happy with their pace and enjoyed the opening day. Jürgen Bertel was 9th fastest through the tighter hills, catching the Escort in front, but would lose over an hour stuck in the mud at the end of stage 3, dropping him down to 20th. The much-anticipated entry of a Ferrari on the Safari for the first time was not to be, after the engine blew days before the start, forcing Marzio Kravos and Renzo Bernardi to roll out the trusty old Mercedes 450. Despite the disappointment, they ended the day in 13th. Simon Tysoe was having trouble finding the right pace, bending a steering arm and getting 2 punches on the second stage before getting bogged down on stage 3. It was a difficult first day. Rainstorms had turned the black cotton into a bog, and many of the crews would have to be pulled out of the mud. Local rally aces Jim Heatherhayes and Asad Anwar were only too happy to get involved, to the relief of many who faced a night in the bush otherwise. Aaron Banks was on his first rally, and it was proving to be a tough introduction. They rolled in the mud on stage 3. Fortunately, the damage was superficial, and they were able to continue despite being another victim of the mud hole. Richard Arrowsmith danced his way through the mud, the Escort rarely pointing in the right direction, but proving that keeping up the momentum was the only way to get through. Eventually, however, the mud would win, and the crew would have to start digging. The first night's rest halt was at the Kilima camp, on the edge of Amboseli Park. With only 2 hours of service permitted, the service park was full of frantic mechanics trying to repair the day's damage and get the cars back into tip-top condition, ready for another unpredictable day. The rally crossed over the border into Tanzania at the tiny border post of Loitokitok. The first stage took the crews along a fast sweeping road through the beautiful forests and foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro, before diving down into the dust bowl around Longido. A flash flood due to heavy rains had turned part of the stage near the end into a lake. The second stage had to be cancelled after much of the route was washed out, so crews had to regroup in Arusha before tackling a short 37-kilometre loop just south of the town. With the snow-capped peak of Mount Kilimanjaro barely visible in the cloud, overnight leader Bjorn Waldergard would be the first into the opening stage. Being first on the road, he was reluctant to push too hard with so many blind crests on the fast, smooth section. He was then first to encounter the flash flood at the end of the stage, but managed to thread his way through the high water. He was fourth fastest, losing the lead in the process. Gregoire de Mevius started the day in second and was pushing hard to take back time from Waldergard. His Dakar experience coming in handy as the route descended onto the notorious plains. He managed to catch Waldergard at the lake and followed him through. He was over 2 minutes faster and took the rally lead.
I could see Bjorn in the long distance. I could see him that he was moving, so I said, if he can do it, I can do it. So I went in the same way. Then we drive behind him till the end because we were so happy to not been stuck.
Ian Duncan was determined to recover the lost time on the first day and set a blistering pace, 24 seconds faster than de Mevius. His straight-line approach to mudholes making for some spectacular photography, but it was not enough to improve on his overall position. Geoff Bell was suffering from overheating brakes on the fast opening 70 kilometres, having to back off in the process. The brakes cooled nicely in the water, they got through the mud cleanly and set the fourth fastest time to move ahead of Marcy and up into fourth overall. Gerard Marcy had found a little more power but lost time getting stuck in the mud. He broke a drive shaft on the road section into Arusha and picked up a 5-minute penalty from the stewards due to illegal service, but still clung on to fifth, Safari Gremlins once again halting his charge. Stig Blomqvist was still smarting from losing so much time the previous day. He set the third fastest time, showing the Escort's potential. He also managed to get through the water and climbed up the leaderboard to 15th.
Yeah, but okay, it's so far behind, so it's just to drive and see what's coming on.
The biggest surprise on the stage was reserved for Josef Jobst in the number 42 Porsche. He was lying 44th overall after a disastrous first day, but went 6th quickest, avoiding getting stuck. Unfortunately, he was still over 5.5 hours behind on the leaderboard. Paolo Faldini in car 48, another Tuthill Porsche, went 9th fastest. The Italian had climbed quietly up the leaderboard, moving from 21st to 11th. John Llyod was one of the day's biggest losers, along with Thomas Flohr. The pair got stuck side by side in the same mud hole, and with no assistance, they lost over 2 hours. John dropped down to 23rd overall, but with so much of the rally left, anything was possible.
We were the first ones to hit the flash flooding. And when we turned left, I mean, I said to Didier, that's a lake, it's not a road. It wasn't a river, it wasn't like streams through a road. It was a lake, so what can you do?
Philippe van Drom benefited from Llyod and Flohr's problems and climbed up to 9th overall behind team boss JP Mondron. The Kronos team would end the day with 3 cars inside the top 10. Franz Wunderlich was another Porsche quietly going about his business. He drove steadily, setting the 12th fastest time, and climbed 7 places up the leaderboard to round off the top 10. Samira Khan was finding the going tough, but was keeping a steady pace and not doing any damage to the car. 35th overall at this stage was comfortable, especially as she was only 2 places behind her uncle Aslam in the more powerful Porsche. The short 37-kilometre section came as a bit of a gift to most crews. It was fast, short and dry, in stark contrast to the rally so far. It was a chance for drivers to open up and really go for it. Waldergard went quickest to take back the lead from Mevius, with Duncan settling in behind in 3rd. Marcy went 4th fastest, but it was not enough to overhaul Geoff Bell, and he would end the day over 5 minutes adrift of the Datsun.
I loved it. It was a fantastic stage. Open area, good cornering, and a lot of drifts to brake for, concrete, culverts, everything. It was fantastic. More of those.
Alistair Kavanagh and Carl Tundo were having a torrid event, mechanical woes plaguing the Escort from the start. They went 5th fastest on the short 37-kilometre loop, showing his true form when the car was performing, but was still languishing down in 17th overall. Despite being 19th fastest on the stage, JP Mondron would end the day 8th overall. Crews returned to the Mount Meru Hotel for a much-needed rest and a chance to rebuild again. Tyre cutting was becoming a bit of a habit as crews had used up the limited mud tyres they'd brought with them. The weather was playing the joker and no one was willing to predict a winner at this early stage. Day 3 would begin with a long 154-kilometre first stage across the Masai Steppe around Lokisala Mountain. The second stage took the crews up the breathtaking Mbulu escarpment with its endless hairpins, stunning vistas and the beautiful backdrop of Lake Manyara. The last stage was a fast run along the top to Karatu, only 7 kilometres from the rim of the world-famous Ngorongoro crater. The rain had held off and the drivers had a chance to enjoy some warm sunshine and dust. Stage 1 was flat out, with long straights giving the crews a chance to open up and push hard. Gregoire de Mevius went fastest on the first stage, taking back the lead by 25 seconds from Waldergard. Waldergard had been forced to stop when he came to a closed barrier across the route and had to blow his horn to get the sleepy owner to come and open it for him. Ian Duncan was the first casualty, however, when the wheel studs sheared and the rear wheel overtook them. They managed to get going by taking a stud out of the 3 remaining wheels, but they lost over 90 minutes. They set the 3rd fastest time up the escarpment before once again having problems on the 3rd stage. They would end the day 22nd overall. Gerard Marcy was embroiled in a battle with Geoff Bell. The Porsche was still lacking power, but he managed to set the 3rd fastest time. Geoff Bell had started ahead of Marcy on the road before going off and hitting a tree. Marcy managed to get past, but Bell caught him once again, his headlights getting smashed by rocks thrown up by the Porsche. In his frustration, he overtook in the dust, only to spin on the next 90 right, picking up a puncture in the process. Thomas Flohr had a very close shave, sliding wide on this bend. The crew was lucky to escape without rolling, but they smashed the front wheel and brake assembly. His co-driver, Didier Breton, managed to fix the damage, but over an hour was lost and they dropped down to 21st. The second stage started with a wide but shallow river crossing. Waldergard went fastest up the escarpment, then again on the next stage to reclaim the rally lead by the end of the day. De Mevius was second fastest despite an engine misfire. The car finally came to a halt on the 3rd stage and they eventually traced the fault by removing the rev counter. They would end the day 8 minutes adrift, but still in second. Take a moment to enjoy the sound of these beautiful cars as they roar their way up the steep escarpment. Stig Blomqvist was still fighting his way back up the leaderboard, setting top 5 times on all 3 stages. The Escort sounding beautiful as it echoed off the valley sides. He would end the day back up in 7th. Franz Wunderlich went 9th fastest on the first stage and kept a steady pace hovering around the top 10. It was enough to move him up into 8th position on his very first visit to the event. Steve Perez was also recovering from his first day dramas, going 4th fastest on the 3rd stage and making his way back up to 10th overall. JP Mondron was having a trouble-free run, unlike the cars in front of him, not damaging his beautiful Porsche and not pushing too hard. He was up to 6th by the end of the day. Peter Sturr in the little Datsun 1600 SS was another crew having a lot of fun whilst the bigger names crumbled. Always relaxed, the crew even found time to stop off and do a bit of shopping. 18th at this stage was just reward for a consistent drive. Thierry Delattre in the 4th Kronos Porsche was another to have a difficult first 2 days and was enjoying a change of fortune, enjoying a trouble-free run and climbing up the leaderboard to 19th. Travis Pastrana damaged the suspension on the first section, but it wasn't slowing him down as he went 6th fastest up the escarpment, despite having no brakes and using the handbrake to get around the tight hairpins. But eventually the front end would cry enough and they would end up on 3 wheels, limping out of stage 3 and losing over 2 hours to end the day down in 24th. Ramesh Vishram encountered a motorbike in the middle of the road on stage 1 and went off into the mud to avoid it, rolling in the process. Then the alternator packed it in before the end of the stage, but they were able to continue to finish the day's stages. There were smiles aplenty as crews returned to Arusha for the overnight rest halt. For the most part, everyone had enjoyed the day's stages, but there was still plenty for the mechanics to get on with.
We missed a double caution ditch on the first one, which we ended up landing on the nose a little bit, but then after that we got going again and hopefully we've taken some time out of some cars in front.
Day 4 saw the rally return to Kenya and Amboseli National Park. Stage 1 was new to the event, taking the crews from Monduli, dropping down a twisty escarpment before racing along the base of the Rift Valley towards Lake Natron, and then cutting right and heading back to Longido. The cars then crossed the border into Kenya at Namanga. Stage 2 was an 84-kilometre loop south of Kajiado and back around to Ilbisel. The final stage was a fast 112 kilometres down to Amboseli Gate and a well-earned rest day in Oltakai. Bjorn Waldergard was intent on extending his lead before the rest day and went fastest on the first stage. Unbeknown to him, de Mevius had stopped in the stage, leaving the old fox with a comfortable margin and the rest of the field conceding that he was now uncatchable. Disaster for Gregoire de Mevius after such a fantastic run. He broke a wishbone 60 kilometres into the 124-kilometre stage and was unable to repair the damage. It was a huge disappointment for the Kronos team, dropping the crew down to 15th. Steve Perez went 2nd fastest on the first stage, despite hitting a drift and bending the steering rack. He then set the fastest time on the 2nd stage. The Datsun was finding its feet again, and Steve was feeling more confident after climbing back up to 6th on the leaderboard. Gerard Marcy was finally having a clean run on the first 2 stages before diverting left around a mud hole and sinking into a bog. He lost over an hour digging the car out. The car was barely distinguishable under the thick coat of mud when it arrived at the Altakai Lodge Parc Fermé. Geoff Bell drove the last 74 kilometres of the first stage with no brakes after tearing off the brake pipe, but still managed to be 7th fastest. On the second stage he had a puncture but went 3rd fastest. By Amboseli he was 2nd overall, 40 minutes adrift of Waldergard, but very happy. Steve Funk found himself in 3rd overall. He was 11th fastest on all 3 of the day's stages, and he was a little shocked to find himself so far up the leaderboard. But it had been a good day for the Race for Change team leader. Blomqvist was not overly impressed with the day. Clutch problems on the second stage were compounded by being reduced to 3 cylinders on the 3rd stage. But with other top drivers also struggling, he still managed to climb back up to 5th overall. Aziz Tejpar took a big jump hard on the second stage and was fortunate enough to use it as a learning experience. Despite setting times outside the top 15, the crew arrived in Amboseli to find themselves lying 9th overall. The Bentley brothers in the beautiful Skipton Ford-prepared Mark I Escort were another crew experiencing the safari for the first time. Driving cautiously, their only issue was a puncture on the first stage. They rounded up the top 10 almost 3 hours down on the leader.
Today we've got lost, we've nearly got stuck in a mud hole, we've had a puncture, and then we've had a clear run, so we're here anyway.
Ian Duncan went 2nd fastest on the long 112-kilometre run into Amboseli, the Perana back up to speed again after the woes of the previous day. It was unlikely he would retain his crown, but he was already back up to 11th overall. Not to be outdone on his final day of the rally, Travis Pastrana went fastest on stage 3. He had shown real flair and would surely be back to have another go in the future.
No, it's great. It's been absolutely an epic adventure. I'm just used to driving a newer whatever car that I charged a little harder, and you know, without knowing where the roads go. I mean, Fabrizia is an amazing co-driver, but definitely drove a little too aggressively, and just had a lot of every stage we had something go wrong where we just had to cruise to the end of the stage, except for 2.
Carl Tundo had taken over the driving seat from Kavanagh. The car refused to start at the beginning of the first stage, losing them 10 minutes. But after that, he would set top 10 times on all 3 stages, going as fast as 4th on stage 2. 16th overall was not where the Kenyan champions wanted to be at this stage of the event. The day was not without its tricky mud holes. Near the end of the first stage, Albert Mikel and Patrick de Koninck decided to take a detour left around what looked like an impossible mud hole, only to get stuck so far inside the swamp that none of the 4-wheel drives could reach them. Eventually, it was left to the Maasai to drag the stricken Porsche back to the road. As the crews trickled into the Altakai Parc Fermé, there was a communal sigh of relief and a few beers at the bar, with the following day being a rest day and a chance for some at least to relax whilst the mechanics rebuilt their cars. The service park was a hive of activity as mechanics worked tirelessly to rebuild the cars after a hard 4 days of rallying, and still only half the event completed. All across the park, gearboxes and suspension parts lay waiting to be rebuilt. A few cars required some welding and panel beating. The overcast morning weather keeping the usual Amboseli heat at bay.
Keep bending TCAs and braking steering arms. I find it difficult to drive slowly on the rough stuff.
For the team drivers today was a chance to relax and recuperate. However, for many private teams, the drivers are often the mechanics as well. Frontrunner Ian Duncan not only set fastest times each day, but spent the evenings repairing the car whilst his title challengers were enjoying a hot shower. Marzio Kravos was keeping the old Mercedes in tip-top condition. Despite all the hard work, there was always time for a coffee in the Italian camp. Kavanagh and Tundo were more used to being at the front of the field and had resorted to trying to sort the car out themselves. Aziz Tejpar was having a good run in his Mark I Escort. Changing oils and checking the rear differential were all part of the routine maintenance required to keep the car running smoothly. Precautionary checks in the Kick Energy camper discovered that the rear control arm mountings on Bell's car were cracked. One had broken through completely. Welding was required that could have cost Bell his second place. It was not all grease and grim, though. For those that had the chance, the day was an opportunity to explore the incredible national park around them. Amboseli nestles in the shadows of the snow-capped peaks of Mount Kilimanjaro. An underground spring feeds a permanent swamp in the middle of the park that attracts an abundance of wildlife, including one of the best-known elephant populations on the African continent. Recent rain had turned the normally dusty park into a lush green oasis, in stark contrast to the previous year when it had been unusually dry. Mount Kilimanjaro peeked its head out of the clouds for the first time on a slightly overcast morning as the crews prepared to begin the 6th day of the event and effectively the second half. The crews had 3 stages to face on the long run up to Lake Naivasha. The first stage ran in reverse along much of the route into Amboseli. Stage 2 took the cars along the edge of the Rift Valley from Kajiado. Skirting Nairobi, the route then dropped into the Rift Valley to Suswa before ending the day at Lake Naivasha. Rain had been predicted for much of the day's stages, but for the frontrunners, the beginning of Stage 1 started dry and dusty. Waldergard was clearly in cruise mode. With such a huge lead, there seemed no reason to push too hard. Duncan started the day second on the road after a reseeding based on stage times. With more to be gained, he was flying, clearly focused on trying to get back on the podium. Blomqvist set about trying to catch Marcy for 4th overall and went fastest on the stage. The dry weather was not to last long and the heavens opened. Before long, Stig was fighting his way along a road that resembled a river. He soon caught and passed Duncan, who'd got bogged down in a mud hole. With no spectators to assist, Duncan and co-driver Amar Slach would have to hand-winch the car out of the mud, losing only 10 minutes in the process. Bell started 4th on the road, intent on keeping hold of his second place. He too got past the bogged-down Capri Perana and went 3rd fastest on the stage. Mevius was also pushing hard. In a similar position to Duncan, he had taken heart from the progress of Perez and Blomqvist and knew there was still plenty to play for. He caught and passed Waldergard before the end of the stage and was 2nd fastest behind Blomqvist. The top 10 made it across the dry sand river minutes before a flash flood came roaring down. The escort of Tundo and Kavanagh were not so lucky. The car drowned as they tried to cross, ingesting water into the engine. Despite draining and changing the oil, the head gasket was damaged and they would miss the rest of the day's stages. Stephen Funk's car was literally carried across by the Maasai. They then pulled the stricken escort out. The pair were now trapped between 2 swollen rivers and would have to wait for the water to subside, dropping him down the order to 5th. Imran Khan, Simon Tysoe's navigator, tried to test the water before crossing, but got swept away by the fast-flowing water. Jim Heather Hayes dived in to rescue Imran, and the two managed to get to safety. Jim received the Shekameta Spirit of Rally Award in recognition of his effort. Many of the crews further back never even made it as far as the river. The rain reached the beginning of the stage, turning the road into an ice rink, and they once again got bogged down in the slug. The little escort of Jonathan Soman would get past several cars that were stuck, but despite Richard Heckel's brave efforts to give the car some grip, the crew would join the rest of the competitors forced to head back to Amboseli when the stage was stopped due to the heavy rain and the flooded rivers. The stewards gave the interrupted cars a scratch time for the stage as per the regulations. The day's dramas were not over. On the second stage from Caggiardo, 500 metres before the end, Waldergard encountered a truck stuck sideways across a mud hole. He didn't back off, thinking he could get past easily, but the car got caught in the slippery ruts and struck the rear of the truck, causing extensive damage. They lost 41 minutes in road penalties while the car was made safe to continue, dropping them down to second overall. Unfazed, the old fox set the fastest time on the final stage of the day.
The lorry who was stuck in a mud hole, and we tried to keep on the left side, but we couldn't get out of the line, so the top corner of the right side hit the back corner of the lorry. It was a big mistake from the old driver. I'm sorry.
Geoff Bell was fastest on the second slippery stage, unaware of Waldergard's accident in front. He was now the new rally leader and would end the day with a 6.5-minute cushion over Bjorn. Perez had a big spin, getting stuck for over 6 minutes when the car wouldn't start. Marcy caught the Datsun and remained behind him, losing time in the process, but was now back on the podium in third overall. The heavens continued to pour down as the crews entered the third stage, with many of the back markers encountering a wall of water as they approached the end of the stage. It had rained on most of the 354-kilometre route all day. Patrick and Giroux was settling into the Porsche nicely after a 10-year absence from rallying and was happy with his progress, climbing up the leaderboard to 16th. The orange Porsche of Jacques Nelliman had been as high as 12th on the first day, but a series of mud holes, navigational errors and punctures had dropped him down to 25th overall. This year's event was a baptism of fire for many first-timers. If the drivers had hoped the second half would be easier, the weather had other ideas. And as Bjorn Waldergard knows only too well, the safari is never over until the finish ramp.
It was a bit wet in places, yeah. It was an adventure, to say the least.
It's proving to be a very, very unpredictable rally, this one.
It is, isn't it? I mean, Bjorn had it in the bag. It's like, and then he's already behind, I think. At least he's still going, that's good.
Day 7 would take the crews on the most northern loop. The first stage followed the wall of the Rift Valley from Menengai to Lake Bogoria. Stage 2 should have taken the crews around the back of Lake Baringo from Laruk. However, overnight rain and high river levels had forced the organisers to cancel the stage. The third stage took the crews up the famous Flohr Spar escarpment. The crews then returned to the Sopa Lodge at Lake Naivasha for a second night. Gerard Marcy started 8th on the road. The stage suited the underpowered Porsche, and he soon overtook Steve Perez, setting the fastest time in the process by almost a minute from fellow Belgium Gregoire de Mevius. John Llyod had had a difficult first half of the rally, but his fortunes seemed to have changed after the Amboseli rest halt. He was having another clean day, setting the 7th fastest time and moving up into 9th overall, ahead of Duncan, who had lost a further 10 minutes stuck in a ditch. Andrew Siddle lost his wipers at the start of the stage, making it difficult to see the road ahead, costing him over 20 minutes. It had not been a good event for the Englishman, who had come to the event with high hopes of beating his teammates for the Gentlemen's World Rally Championship. With the second stage cancelled, the cars were given a 30-minute service at the Lake Bogoria Hotel before going into a Parc Fermé, where they were held before going straight into the third section. For Bjorn Waldergard, the cancellation of the second stage was frustrating, as he needed as many competitive kilometres as possible in his bid to reclaim the lead from Bell. For rally leader Geoff Bell to have led the rally for a day was more than he could have hoped for. The Datsun was not as nimble in the slippery climb up the Flohr Spar escarpment, and he could only manage 6th fastest, but it was enough to hold on to his lead by 7 seconds for the second day in a row. Bjorn Waldergard would probably have regained the lead if he hadn't stopped on the stage when the main electrical switch cut out. Mevius was out of the car when it fired up again, losing nearly 2 minutes. Then they broke a top shock mount, but still managed to be second fastest. Gregoire de Mevius was making the most of the slippery conditions on the tight, twisty stage and went fastest by over 2 minutes. He was through the mechanical problems that had put him out of contention for the overall lead, but was happy to be 6th overall. Stig Blomqvist was 4th fastest despite losing his clutch early on in the stage. He had started the day just over 2 minutes behind Marcy, but dropped 3.5 minutes on the first stage, then picked up a 2-minute time penalty, ending the day over 7 minutes down, but still in 4th overall. Duncan went 5th fastest, the powerful V8 not so well suited to the slippery hairpins and narrow tracks. Despite losing time on the first stage, it was enough for him to break back into the top 10 overall. JP Mondron was 8th fastest on the stage. He had started the day 15th on the road, but managed to get through the tricky stage without any problem, holding on to his 7th overall position. Franz Wunderlich was one of the few crews to make it through the stage unscathed. Despite finding the route so slippery he was forced to crawl up the hill in first gear, he still managed the 10th fastest time. Disaster struck again for the organisers. An army truck had gone into the stage and slid sideways, getting stuck across the route and blocking the road, forcing the rally stewards to once again give the majority of the field a scratch time, which would be the same as Stephen Funk's 11th fastest time, the slowest car to complete the stage. Philippe Van Drom was one of the big losers of the day. He had driven cautiously on the first stage, but after getting stuck in the 3rd section, he lost his 8th overall position and dropped back to 11th overall. Perez had an interesting stage. The car was handling funny, and they went off into the ditch. Teammate Andrew Siddle saw Perez in the ditch and tried to get past just as Perez popped out of the ditch, and the two collided.
He just can't control his car, span into a ditch and decided to wait for me until I was about 100 yards away, come back onto the track. And it wasn't as if he couldn't see because he was facing me. So he then came on, I put my brakes on and slid saying, "Steve, why did you do that?" Bang, and that was that.
It would be a long day for Jürgen Bertel. The car slid off the track completely and down into the ravine. Fortunately, the thick bush held him, but it was impossible to get the car out. The sweeper car almost ended up in the same position after attempting to pull him out, and the two wouldn't arrive back into Nijvasha until late into the night. Bernhardt and Ronnie Kessel had not had a good rally. The car looked a little worse for wear after an off earlier in the rally. They were happy to still be running after battling with the mud on most days, a good time on stage 1 moving them up into 33rd. Kurt Engelhorn and son-in-law Johan Nell were enjoying their first safari. Another crew who spent most days axle-deep in mud, they were still smiling and had moved up a place to 37th. The crews returned to the Nijvasha Sopa Lodge for a well-earned rest after another rain-soaked and difficult day.
It has been a good day in extremely difficult conditions. We had light rain all day and slippery like hell. Very slippery.
For the service crews, many would work late into the night after waiting for their cars to come back in after dark. The crews began the long haul back towards the coast with the final night stop at Voi Wildlife Lodge. The first section would take the crews from Suswa back to the Ungong Hills. This was followed by a short 2.5-kilometre spectator stage at Athi River, before heading to Kiu for a 100-kilometre sprint down to Imali. The 4th stage was once again new to the rally, with a beautiful 36-kilometre loop around Sagala before arriving in Voi. The day dawned bright and clear, and the sun was finally shining as the crews headed into the first stage, with its spectacular views along the floor of the Rift Valley. Waldergard was on the charge, the stage so familiar to him after many safaris. He went fastest by almost 2 minutes and recaptured the lead he'd lost 2 days before. Geoff Bell was content to settle for second place, knowing all too well from 2009 that anything can happen with only 1 day remaining, and with over an hour's gap to third, the crew could afford to cruise and conserve the car. Gregoire de Mevius was second fastest, intent on trying to catch the Datsun of Perez in front of him. He would have to make up over 19 minutes if he was to take over fifth spot, but could only pull back 2 minutes on this stage. Duncan had a moment of indecision, but went third fastest. He had started the day 5.5 minutes behind John Llyod, and by the end of the stage had already taken back almost 4 minutes. A string of top 5 times would see him back up to 7th by the end of the day. Stephen Funk had found a good rhythm on the opening section and went 4th fastest, moving him past the Kronos Porsche of JP Mondron and up into 7th position. Steve Troman broke a tie rod end on the rocky uphill climb midway through the stage. He managed to limp to the end, but the time lost meant he dropped 4 places down the leaderboard to 20th. The special stage at Thathi River gave spectators from Nairobi the chance to see the cars from vantage points above the quarry and get a feel for the atmosphere of the event. The 2.5-kilometre loop was won by Gregoire de Mevius, but would have little bearing on the overall results. Gerard Marcy went on a charge in a bid to try to regain third position and set the fastest time on the queue to Imali stage. He was 4 minutes faster than Blomqvist, narrowing the gap to just 2 minutes again. Paolo Faldini was once again back up to speed, setting the 10th fastest time, climbing 7 places up the leaderboard. He had started 22nd on the road and managed to overtake 5 cars on this stage alone, but was still down in 32nd overall. Richard Jackson was also having an excellent day. The car was running well, and despite finding navigation on the third stage difficult, he was finding his way around the mud holes and finished the day 14th overall. The 4th stage was supposed to be a sprint around Sagala Hill and was new to the event. However, a mud hole near the end of the stage would add more drama to the ever-changing story of the event. Stig Blomqvist went fastest, cementing his 3rd overall position, and managed to skirt the mud hole without any problems. Similarly, Waldergard also got through, just, and was very relieved to end the day with a comfortable 25-minute cushion heading into the last day of the rally. Geoff Bell was also attacking hard after picking up a puncture on the previous stage and discovering the nutgun's battery was flat. Gregoire de Mevius finally ran out of luck. He hit a rock, damaging the front wheel. The crew managed to tie it all together and get moving, but lost a place on the road as Duncan went past. Duncan got stuck sideways in the mud hole, and as Gregoire tried to get past, the quick fix let go and the wheel came off. The car was stuck fast, blocking the road for the crews behind. It had been a brave run, but the crew would end the day back down in 13th overall. Others, like Philippe van Drom, tried to find a way around with the help of some local motorcyclists. John Llyod lost time as his guide was on a mountain bike. Both crews lost the same amount of time it took Duncan to get out of the mud. One by one, the cars arrived at the mud hole and got stuck. Ropes were attached and the crews were pulled through. Not everyone took the cautious approach, however, and fortune favoured the brave, as demonstrated by Aslam Khan. Jürgen Bertel wound up the Porsche and also attacked, sailing through the mud spectacularly. This was not lost on Richard Arrowsmith, who also made it through without stopping, giving the mud crews a well-earned break. Nick Mason was similarly spectacular, giving the cameraman a moment's cause for concern. It was another long day, and as the crews relaxed for the final night's rest at Voi Wildlife Lodge, for many the focus would just be on reaching the finish ramp the following day.
We had a very surprising moment, as I guess we have missed some narrow bridges somewhere in the notebook. And I think nobody was quicker on this bridge than us, because this was really good luck.
The final day of the rally once again took the crews back into the tighter hills for a short loop from Shelembwa to Wundanyi, another safari classic. Stage 2 would once again be shortened to avoid the muddy Sisal estates and would take the crews from Maungu through Rukanga to McKinnon Road. Finally, a loop near the coast from Mariakani to Majengo before the finish ramp and celebrations back where it all started at White Sands Hotel. The day began with a spectacular Savo sunrise and the promise of a bright sunny day. For many, it was just a question of getting through the final stages and making it back to the finish. Bjorn Waldergard could afford to cruise. The hard work on the previous day had given him a decent cushion, and he even set his first non-top 10 stage time of the rally. It had been a masterful drive by the old fox, displaying the skills that had brought him 5 previous victories in the safari. A brilliant recovery from a rare error on day 6, only adding a little suspense to what many had felt was a foregone conclusion. For son Mateus, the victory would be 2 for 2, after guiding Bjorn to victory in the 2007 event. Geoff Bell had driven a fantastic and measured rally. He was overjoyed to have led the rally for 2 days, but was equally pleased to finish second between 2 former world champions. As if to remind him that it's never over until the final flag, he picked up a double puncture and cracked the rim on the final stage, losing 10 minutes, but had such a large lead over Blomqvist that it wasn't to have any effect on his position. Stig Blomqvist could be forgiven for thinking the rally was over after his axle problems on day 1. But this is the safari, and with so many kilometres left, he had managed to fight his way back from 31st to make it 3 different manufacturers on the podium after what seemed like a Porsche stranglehold for much of the event. Gerard Marcy loves the safari, which has not always been kind to him. Once again, mechanical problems and mud holes that everyone else got around would hamper his fight for victory. 4th was probably a huge reward and proof of his continued determination to fight back every day. Steve Perez had hoped to improve on his 3rd overall position in 2009, but was another driver forced to come back from 33rd position after his prop shaft broke on day 1. The only real top 10 battle on the final day was between Stephen Funk and Ian Duncan. Lying 6th overall, Funk would have to push hard to defend his place from the charging Ford Capri Perana. Throwing caution to the wind, he went fastest on the 2nd stage to McKinnon Road and managed to hold on to his position. It was a great event for the Race for Change director and would do much to increase the profile of his cause. Ian Duncan's defence of his 2009 crown was not to be. He had fought bravely back after the disasters of day 4, working hard every night to keep the Perana going against the big teams, but it was not to be for the Kenya champion, and in the end he would have to settle for 7th overall. For JP Mondron, 8th overall was a replica of his 2009 result, but conditions on this year's event were much tougher. Disappointment for his Kronos team that had come to the event hoping Mevius would be in the fight for victory would only slightly sour the celebrations as teammate Philippe van Drom brought the 2nd car home in 10th place overall. Splitting the Kronos Porsches was the Viking Escort of John Llyod and Adrian Kavanagh. It had been a long, hard event for the pair, mechanical woes hampering their progress. 9th overall was commendable after 9 gruelling days. Heartache for Aziz Tejpar, who'd been lying in 11th place and had driven a decent rally. The head gasket blew and they would have to keep stopping to let the engine cool. They lost so much time that they slipped down the leaderboard to 23rd, a huge disappointment for the crew. Govinda Sandhu and Harpal Suddle had driven the only Datsun P710 to 17th overall. The car had worked well, and the crew had got through much of the mud that caught so many of their fellow competitors out. After disappointment in 2007 and 2009, Marzio Kravos finally brought the old Mercedes 450 SLC home in 24th overall. Expect to see the crew back in 2013 in a Ferrari Dino. Samira Khan had been on a steep learning curve in the event. She had driven cautiously and had done no major damage to the little Escort. The girls were very happy to reach the finish and made it into the top 30 with 29th overall. As the crews arrived one by one at the Parc Fermé on the lawns of the White Sands Hotel, there was a sense of relief and pure awe at having conquered one of the wettest safaris in history.
Yes, it was really difficult with the weather. The weather gave us a lot of nightmares. The rains came down with a vengeance. I believe this is probably the wettest classic ever, and in my opinion, had this been an all-day safari, we would have had less than 7 finishers like we used to in the old days. So this was a real epic adventure.
I came here the first time 1971. That's exactly 40 years ago. And I was leading then in a Porsche, and I crashed in Uganda in the dust. And so I was not experienced enough, but I am now, 40 years later.
Oh, we've had a great event. We've been very lucky because we've had no real problems, driven very carefully the whole event, and managed to end up here between Bjorn Waldergard and Stig Blomqvist. I mean, you know, do me a favour, how good can it get?
Yeah, we had no mechanical issues at all. In fact, the car is so good, we could actually start the rally all over again. Yes, we had our flip before the rally, but I think that got the jinx out of the way.
As the champagne flowed and the crowds cheered, the curtain closed on another classic African adventure. This had truly been one of the toughest safaris in history, a fact not lost on many of the competitors who are proud to have played their part on this great stage. Congratulations, and see you in 2013.